Okay. So, hello, and today I am so excited about Leonard, and he has this amazing book called Culture is the Bass. And I actually got the book a couple of months ago and never thought that we would be in this COVID environment. But here we are, and I'm so delighted that I can actually meet him in person and talk to him and welcome him. And he's also going to be at our club. And I'm not going to give you the date because I want this to be a live recording that we can use on and off. But I think he'll be a frequent club speaker. And so we're excited to have him in the month of August and then maybe in the future. And so, Gerald, tell me, so you're currently the president and CEO of Principles of Execution, the Strategic Project Portfolio Management and IT Governance Consulting Firm. That's a mouthful. So tell us a little bit about what you currently do.
Okay, so what I currently do is I work with pretty large organizations, really helping them to streamline and really think through their processes as far as how they're managing their projects. But my focus is more than just the project management and program portfolio management piece. It's the culture change, because every time anyone introduces a project, program, or portfolio, you're introducing massive change to an organization. So one of my clients is a large state Department of Transportation. They have over 1,000 project managers out in the field. And I've helped them to integrate a system that has over 14,000 projects with a $16 billion budget. And they were rated #1 by the Federal Highway Administration now based on their scheduling platform. I'm also doing some consulting for an international consulting firm, a larger consulting firm, helping them build a program management training program, but more than a course, it's kind of like a mentoring coaching program that'll take about 4 months for a cohort to go through. And when they go through it, they'll graduate with the knowledge and skills to be able to lead really large programs within the biopharma space. So that's a lot of
amazing.
what I do from that standpoint.
And you're probably very busy right about now because everyone is trying to find new solutions to stimulate their teams and get more service out of them. And I see that Elton Brewington has joined the call. Elton, do you have something to say about the consulting firm?
Wow. First, let me tell you, it's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Discuss some of the formats of your business procedures, and also my colleague has told me a little bit about what you're engaged in, and it's an amazing time, and we're excited to consider working with you with some of the things that we're working on, and perhaps there are some synergies and areas that we could develop and proceed with doing greater business volumes for. And
sure, exactly.
Yeah,
this is a great time.
That sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to a long-term relationship as well. So now I see from your beautiful resume and bio in your book that you went to Central State University in Ohio and you received a bachelor in music, and then you later earned a master's degree in music for classical bass from the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. So, wow. So being not just a musician that learns to play, but actually going to school. Tell us what that experience was about.
It was the beginning of a really great journey. I left home thinking I was going to Berklee College of Music because when I was in high school, I was really good at music, but I didn't pay as much attention to academics as I should have. And so I could get into Berklee for a certification, but they wouldn't give me a degree. Mom didn't like that too much. So I stayed with my brother, and I met a gentleman named Lamont Parson, who knew the chairman of Central State, which is a historically Black college. I'd never heard of Central State before I left home. And he was a really good jazz player, and he taught me a lot, not the techniques, but the style and the feeling of jazz. And so he said, what you're doing, he goes, you need more than a certificate. You need a bio, and let him in audition. So I did. And I auditioned for them, and they gave me a full scholarship, asked me to be a part of the marching band for 2 years, and that was the beginning of the journey. You know, with small minority schools like Central States, right across the street from Wilberforce, Ohio, and Wilberforce University, which is another historically Black college. You know, they don't really have an orchestra. And so we actually went outside of the school and found me a teacher. And the lady that started working with, her name was, I remember her first name was Deborah, but she played with the Dayton Philharmonic, and she used to sub at the Cincinnati Symphony. And so she really grew me to play in a major symphony orchestra. And then I met a gentleman named Frank Proto, where I really started learning how to combine my classical and jazz, because that's what he did and that's what he wrote and taught. And that's how I ended up going from Central State, going down to Cincinnati, because I had a connection that introduced me to one of the main composers for the Cincinnati Symphony and a teacher down there. And then, so I did my master's there, and that was an amazing experience. Because the whole time I was in school, I played as a musician. And so I supported myself as a musician as I went through school, and then moved to New York after that.
Mm-hmm. So your bass has been your
That's
primary
awesome.
instrument throughout?
Yeah, bass has been in my life since I was 12 years old.
Oh, wow. But not in the marching
Yeah.
band.
It's been in my life since I was 12, and it's been it's been a good little journey. We've had a good time, and it's getting better.
Band, what'd you play?
Yeah, I did play in the marching band for 2 years, and that was a lot of fun.
What'd you play?
One of the reasons it was a lot of fun is the guy who's the chairman of the school now. His name is Leonard Moses, and he grew up in Trinidad and was a drummer for the Mardi Gras down in Trinidad. He played with a group called the Gay Desperados, steel band and percussive. And he was a little guy that would sit on the top of the cars and just kind of like keep the drums going the whole parade. Well, when he got to Central State, he brought that same fire and enthusiasm of the Caribbean and Trinidad to the marching band. So we would be playing calypso type music and dancing to it. So he helped me with my rhythm.
Very good. Yeah. Awesome.
That's interesting, because I used to be the band majorette in my school, and I was in charge of a 50-piece band, and I was a drummer. But Elton was in his band, and he was a sax player. So we are three.
That's awesome.
We're three band. I mean, I don't think anyone can ever express how exciting it is to be in a school band. It's just an awesome experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Elton, would you like to share some of your moments with?
I think, I mean, collectively, eclectically, you know, music, I mean, is a foundation for who we are as people. I mean, for a youth and a student to miss out on those experiences, it's just, you know, you can't explain that. You know, I mean, and for kids that have those experiences, and in your case, of course, it led you to move forward into music as a career. You know, and you know, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's a band instructor, and he teaches middle school, but I mean, he also played in our university marching band. And so, I mean, and so he now leads the charge for creating other professors or teachers of music. And so, and as a career, I mean, I tease him all the time. I said, you know, that's the reason rap has taken over our world, is because nobody can really play music anymore.
That's a big part of it. I mean,
that's
a big part of it.
You can't replace really good and great musicians.
No. You know, and it really does our youth, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves about music and music schools. It really does our children a disservice to not encourage them to play, because although I would say middle school, high school, my academics wasn't as strong, right? And mom kind of had to ride me a little bit. Because I loved music, there was a part of my brain being developed. And so I have a certification in what is called Conversational Intelligence, which is the neuroscience of conversations. So I've done a lot of study and reading and getting the certification about the neuroscience. But what happens is while you're playing music and having fun, you're also developing the mathematical part of your brain.
Sure.
So it's the same part of your brain that
Absolutely.
is used for geometry or calculus or high-level math, or would make you a CFO of a company. Or even an engineer and a software engineer. You're developing that by having fun playing music.
Yeah.
And so when we take music away from children in their development, we are basically really undercutting our whole society as far as being able to, elevate and have such a higher education.
Sure.
Back in the day, they called it more liberal arts, and you were a well-rounded person if you studied literature and music, because it developed both sides of the brain. And that's incredibly true. And I know that my musical upbringing and being able to perform and read and learn and study music, when I made the switch and said, okay, I got to get serious about academics, it made it so much easier because those parts of my mind, my brain, had been developed as a musician. And especially when I got into computers, it was like picking up another instrument, honestly.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
kinetically, you make a great, I mean, the argument is true. Our kids are growing up deficient in a lot of ways. And then,
Right.
in the growing years, that deficiency can never be made up.
Right.
It's just that, I mean, because especially if you ever get close to using 100% of your brain, I'm sure music and the development of the use of music has to be tied into it to some extent.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's a tremendous area. So
Yeah.
wow, I mean, your background is quite amazing.
It is that you actually had a ministry position with the Church of Christ in New York,
Yep.
and both of us are great with churches. Elton is a pastor, so tell us about that church experience, because I know every musician has got to be in a church to get even better than with all the academic influences. Yeah.
Right. Well, that experience was an amazing experience, and it's really foundational. It was another pillar. If I could think of my life in certain pillars, I would say, that part of my life was a critical pillar of me becoming who I am today. And with my understanding of God and faith and so on. It was after I'd finished my master's, I moved to New York, and I actually had an opportunity to go. I'm not sure if I talk about it in that book or my next book, but I had an opportunity to go and do some work with the Detroit Symphony. But I decided to stay because of things that were going on in New York, to stay in New York. My teacher from Cincinnati actually got me connected with his teacher in Juilliard. And while I was there, I was starting to kind of be a part of a Bible talk and group. And so I was playing music and I was doing, the Bible study group. And I started really it really impacted me, and I started having an impact on others. And I had the same, emotional passion for the impact that I saw my life was having on others, just as I had with music. And so for a period of time, probably about 5-6 years, I played music part-time and actually did ministry full-time. And
Wow.
was able
What
to,
church were you
and
affiliated with?
because of the music, I was able to do a lot with it within the church. And we did a lot of concerts for, one of the doctors was really had a mission for helping Africa with, because AIDS was rampant at the time in Africa. And so we did a lot of benefit concerts for AIDS for Africa. We did a lot of other types of concerts to kind of raise money for different events. And it was a balance of spiritually growing and maturing and developing, but also continually being able to use my talent. And it got me to a place where I was pretty content with what I was doing, but now I started having that urge to get back into music. And so at that point, I had gotten married and had 2 kids. And, that's where the IT and technology came in, because I grew up, my dad was
You got to
always
feed a
there.
family.
And I couldn't see myself now with creating a family and leaving them to go on the road and play music all the time. But
What
I
church in
playing
New
Yep.
my
York
own
did you
Yep.
process.
work with? What
Say it
church
again?
in New York? What church in New York did you work with?
It was a New York City church, and I actually started, it was a group called the Harlem Ministry. I actually started that ministry.
Okay.
Wow,
Very
that's
good. Very good.
amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah. and they say that nobody. When I read your autobiography, I said, "My goodness me," because nobody can do you like church folks, and they sent you to college and school, and you got so credentialed after that.
Well, here's how the credentials happen. Because
yeah, so
I
now,
had already did my
you
master's.
can walk us through those credentials.
Well,
Yeah.
here's what happened.
Okay.
I had already done my master's, and kind of I hadn't really worked in corporate or out in the world from that standpoint. I've always played music or was doing church. And when I looked and said, okay, if I'm going to go back and take care of my family and get in corporate, do I go get a master's in finance? Do I go get a master's in business? And what I started noticing was individuals who went after certain certifications came out of that training, and if they had real world experience, they were honored and paid just as much as someone who went and spent another 2 years and $100,000 for an MBA or a master's. And so when I think I did like a Novell certification of networking, and then I went to Microsoft and I did maybe like 9 or 10 certifications in Microsoft.
I saw that.
And by the time I was done, my salary had bumped up, I would say a good 30 or 40%. And I was being offered opportunities and jobs that other people who had spent years in school for engineering, I was being offered them because I had real world experience, the maturity of having done the ministry, so I knew how to handle and talk to people as people and not as a computer. And the music obviously background helped, but I was bringing this wealth of knowledge, but also this real world experience. And so I just realized that instead of trying to go back and get another degree, I would figure out the areas I wanted to grow in and go find a top-notch university and get a certification in it. And so that led me to.
So how did you end up leaving? How did you end up leaving New York to Alabama?
How did I end
He's
up
taking
leaving
you
New
back.
York
I'm
for
bringing
Alabama?
you forward.
That gets into a deep story. But basically, we all have our ups and downs, right? We all have our challenges. And after being married for a long period of time, there were I'd say the last 7 or 8 years of the marriage, things started kind of going south. And about 2 years before I came down here, it was right before I did my TEDx talk, I had a major bout with vertigo. And I literally lost the ability to walk. And
you told me that, yes.
Yeah, and so basically it put me in a place where I needed a lot more support and help, and it just wasn't there.
Oh, I see.
And things that were said, things that were done that was kind of hard to recover from.
I got you. But what was it about Alabama? I mean I've been through Alabama.
Family.
Okay.
Family.
That's right. I understand that. No.
Our neighbor is from Alabama. Yeah, and he gets me this amazing ginger ale that we just love so much. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm down near the Mobile area, near the water, so it's nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been to Alabama once. I was just traveling through, and I know a little bit about it. And of course, we understand it's a cultural shock because we moved from New York to North Carolina, and it's similar in a lot of ways. But I mean, as a culture and an intellectual, you're totally misunderstood.
Well, the interesting thing is because of the years I've spent in New York and in Washington D.C. and the network that I've built and things like along that line and the consulting and contracting that I do, I have no clients in Alabama. So
no, of course not.
I work from home, and I simply just live here. And I have a client in Virginia, and I have a client that's global. And the gentleman I'm working with there is in India. My literary agent is in New York. A lot of my networking groups are in Philadelphia or in Las Vegas, and then I'm right now talking with a client that's in California. So I'm literally able to
totally
my interaction with Alabama is more from my friends and family and going to the store and going to the curbside to pick something up or along that line. But I haven't I didn't have to go through the process of, you know, trying to integrate and, you know, work with colleagues and, you know, people trying to understand you. I've not had to do that. And now that the books are taking off and a lot of other things are happening, it's kind of still the same way.
Yeah.
And you know, it's
It
kind of
is.
a
It is.
it helps you adapt, and you
Yeah.
understand, because I mean you got to you got to adapt in a way that's, you know, what they say, you determine what side or which area of the country your bread is buttered on, you
Right.
know.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
the way that it is.
So I'm going to, yes, that's true. Elton's right. You know, and the thing that you've overcome vertigo and so many things and transitioned, has made you tough as nails, which makes you a very powerful speaker today. So I want to go now with all those credentials, and then you ended up with the Wharton School Entrepreneurship
Yeah.
Acceleration Program. And now let's dive into the book. So, tell us a little bit about this book, and then we'll go to the new book. But I'm interested in the 7 steps to creating high-performance teams, especially
Okay.
now during COVID. Everyone wants to, you know, motivate their teams to work from home
Right.
and not just pick up welfare checks, but to actually
Yeah.
work. So tell us a little bit about how can we motivate teams
Okay. So
during this
one of the
time.
ways we can motivate teams, and if you think back about your experience, because both of you guys are musicians. Think back of the team flavor and the experience of playing in a band or leading or, you know, being a majorette or the things that you were doing musically. You know, you had a vision for what you wanted the sound to be like. You had a set of standards, values or guidelines that everyone needed to kind of live by, right? As things went on within the band, it created stories. Hey, remember that time? And remember we did this and remember we did that. And you created an environment of what you wanted, how you wanted to be treated and how you wanted to treat others. You created some best practices. You know, hey, make sure when you come in, make sure you know your stuff, make sure you come in on time, make sure you have this, have that. You know, we're going to do these things. And then once with all of that going on, now we're really set up to what I would say execute. That's in the simplest form, that's the book. And it's really taken my experience as a musician, because as a musician, when you're working with other musicians, there's a language, music is a language that transcends color,
Sure.
race, any language. I mean, you can take guys who come from other opposite ends of the world, put them together and put a sheet of music in front of them, and they start playing within a day or so or less. They're going to be the best friends, and they're going to be emotionally connected. Right? Because that's what music does. It's almost like a spiritual experience. It transforms. Well, the purpose of the book was to give people stories about music and musical experiences and how music works, to show them that there's a simple 7-step process for changing any organization's, countries, or churches, or families' culture. And I did a lot of research in that. So, you know, I went from my musical background. I thought about, you know, a metaphor and a model for that. And then, you know, because I don't really consider myself an intellectual, but I like peer-reviewed material, right? So I went to like Harvard, I went to MIT, I went to the Wharton, and I went to their websites and I looked and I did research, and I kept finding these 7 things that came out. And it was, creating a great culture requires you to have a great vision. It requires you to have a set of values that's used as criteria for decisions. It's not enough to say, we value our people, and then you cut them when things get tough. You know, if you value your people, then you will do everything in the world to keep your people with you, because you know that's your value, right? That's your value. Stories are critical. And then the other thing, the other principle was buy-in. And I say buy-in is a team sport. You never hear of one individual winning a Super Bowl, a NBA Finals, the World Cup, it's always the team. And most of those teams are at the same level, but it's the team that synergizes the most, that really gets on the same page and has each other's back and pushes each other and kind of puts yourself out there. So it's the vision, it's values, it's stories, it's buy-in, it's understanding what are the best practices that are out there and in baking those into the way we do business and the way we talk to each other. It's in the way we use our software. It's the way our office is set up, and then the environment. If we go into an environment, we're saying, hey, we're world class, but our office is not doesn't look world class. Well, we're not going to feel world class. But if we say we're world class and we establish an environment that looks world class and people treat each other as world class, they dress as world class, you're going to become world class. And when you have those those 6 things, you're going to create an organization that can truly execute and really kind of create this cadence of just getting things done and knocking them all apart. So that's the premise of the first book.
I'm listening to your dialogue and your conversation here. Now, quite frankly, our current day events require more attention from a universal point of view about culture. And the conversations about culture have become front and center. About who we are as a country, where we're going to go. And is your book written from that context, or is just a coincidence? But and I say that to say that perhaps, I mean, this is very instrumental stuff right now. If we're trying to lead the common day experience for all who call themselves, benefactors and producers of material.
Right. Well, it's written from it's definitely written from that standpoint. It wasn't written with COVID in mind, right? It wasn't written with catastrophe in mind, but it was written from the standpoint that any organization, when I say any, I mean, multinational corporation, family group, small church, mom and pop store. And it starts with the vision. If everyone, so if you think about the rhetoric that is being discussed today, we have it's like we have two different forces. One is kind of tearing things down and one trying to unify. And what are they doing? What they're doing, each person that gets up and speaks is they're trying to use words to cast a vision or a view of the world that their people will buy into. Right? That's trying to create a view of the world that their people will buy into. And if they can create a compelling vision that people then will buy into, and they establish principles or values that people are willing to live by, then you're going to create a situation where you're going to get people on the same page or buying into it and kind of moving forward with what you're trying to do. In every situation, it starts with that.
Well, I think we have an audience.
Of change, it always has those 7 things involved with them.
I think we have a universal audience now because of where we are politically, and I think nationally. I think there's a demand for conversation and perspective about where we need to be and what can drive our discussions for truer senses of our common good. I mean, and these things need to be front and center. Absolutely, they need to be front and center, and we need to discuss what directions and angles we can take, perhaps with your book and perhaps with the conversations that are necessary and the things that we drive because of the compelling forces that we're engaged with. We are actively pursuing conversations and dialogue and political agenda and those kind of things that the whole world can benefit from. Because what they say, the only thing that needs to happen for evil to prosper is that good men and women do nothing. And it's like a chalkboard. I mean, and everybody's trying to write on your chalkboard, but they can only write on it if you haven't written on it yourself.
Correct.
So, and clearly you've been writing, clearly both music and book. So, I mean, but this is something that our youth and the common good for our country and the world need to see and understand. And
Right.
it's a time for it. It's really a time for it. So, I mean, this is an important conversation. So we're engaging with you to determine how do you see what you're promoting, even in your book. Now, I haven't read the book, and I apologize, but there must be some parallel between culture as a base and your bass
Yeah,
playing
well,
too.
when I started writing it, that song "All About That Bass" was out,
Oh yeah, I remember that. I
and
remember
so
that.
I did
Yeah.
consider that for a title of the book. But I thought, well,
It's
so I
okay.
didn't want to infringe on them too much,
All
make it
right,
too obvious.
right, right. What was
But
her name?
if you
Trainer.
think
Her
about
first
it,
name was. Uh-huh.
if you think about it, and really, I have to give credit where credit is due. While I was in the New York or the DC area, I had joined the National Speakers Association,
Okay.
and when I went there, I met Dr. Willie Jolly. Well,
Okay.
Jolly and his wife Dee live in DC, and as I was getting ready to take an academy program with the National Speakers Association, I'm always into constant learning and development, so on and so forth, as you can see from my from all those certs. They had a weekend class, and so I said, okay, this is a good investment. I'm going to do it. So I spent the weekend with them, and they really, once they learned that I was a musician, because he's a jazz singer that became a professional speaker, and she's an educator, they basically helped me take these concepts and go, wait a minute, you're not doing all this other project complex stuff. You're changing companies' culture when you're done, and you do it this way. And you got the music, and then Willie was like, "Yeah, it's all about that bass, baby." So I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah,
Yeah. No,
that's
really.
So it really helped me to step back
Yeah.
and see the two. And as I mulled it over and started playing with the ideas, the book just began to come to life. And the premise of it is, if you think of any good music, regardless of the genre, whether it's classical, jazz, rock and roll, R&B, Celtic, whatever. Good music always has a strong backbeat, but a really solid bass.
Okay.
Like the music, as soon as the music starts, you just you just start tapping your head and bopping because it just moves you spiritually. It
Sure.
just moves you.
Yeah.
Well, that's culture.
Sure.
And so I started thinking about, well, what companies move me? I like going to Nordstrom, not the Nordstrom that you got to pay a lot of money for. I
Right.
like going to Nordstrom Rack. And
Okay.
where I lived in Maryland, there was a few really nice ones, right?
Okay.
And I could go and buy $1,000 suit for like $500,
Right. Right.
Wow.
or a $100 tie for
Uh-huh.
$20. That became my store.
No, I used to
Yeah.
go there.
I
So
believe I
that
experienced that.
was in Potomac Mills. There was one in Potomac Mills out there.
Exactly. But so they had quality. But here's the thing: they had a process. They had a culture of, if you bought it from here, no matter how long you had it, you can always return it. Or
Yeah.
if you need something, we will bend over backwards. And I read so many stories. I thought, huh. And then I thought about the way Google. I thought about Apple. I thought about stores that I kind of admired, not because I'm like looking at the dollar amounts, but just the way they treated people and the good that they were doing. And it all boiled down to their culture.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So
interesting.
just like the bass in a good song, culture
Yeah.
and a great organization sets it apart and gets you to kind of fall into a vibe with it. So that's kind of the
So
principle.
do you target those companies to train and to profile because of that? Is that the angle that you take, or how
No,
does
I mean,
that?
I target, like I have some campaigns that I run. I target organizations who, one, they kind of speak my language as far as the project, program, portfolio management. And I'm not someone that's just trying to, kind of run in organizations and do a talk about culture and then run to the next one. I like helping them create a transformational change. So it does sometimes require working in a large organization and being there for a while, right? I mean, I had one of my clients that the engagement started off as a 3-month engagement, and now we've been working together for almost 7 years.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's amazing.
or someone will say, hey, can you help us with this? And it's just 2 months worth of work. Okay. Now it becomes, almost 2 years worth of work.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And that's
So
how it happens.
many companies will engage in that kind. Well, actually, more and more organizations are going to engage because they've seen that they've. As a matter of fact,
Right.
even from your point of view, we'll have to drive a real, true initiative for these corporations who ignored these elements for so long. Now we need
Right.
to drive an agenda for them to make these corrections. From the standpoint of adjusting for the greater good of the corporate life, for the greater
Yeah.
good of simpatico for their corporate employees, and for the greater good for your customer base, because
Yes.
they understand that you're really trying to drive policy, agenda, and a fortitude and strong base level growth.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So yeah, so I want to wrap up this interview and then we'll stop recording and then we can chat some more. But I want to tell my audience that this is an amazing book and it's a great time to be doing this while you're in COVID. You can buy this book on Amazon, and I know that there's another book coming along, and there's a music album coming along. So if you want to tell them about that as well, and then we will see you, Gerald, at our club, where we're hoping to hear some of the music and some of the book and a little bit of a motivational talk. So tell us about your upcoming things, and then I'm going to close.
Okay, so my upcoming book, I'm really excited about it. After doing the first book, which was self-published, I shared what I was doing with a literary agent, and they signed me up. They basically, so now I have an agent that represents me, and they sold the book, the new coming book, to Business Expert Press, and it's called Workplace Jazz. And again, if you think of a really tight jazz ensemble, most organizations now are doing work as small agile teams. Well, it's the same makeup as a jazz ensemble. And the other part is that a lot of employers, they still want to treat employees like employees. But today, employees are like talented musicians. You don't treat a talented musician like an employee. You respect him as a musician.
Right.
And you work together, and it's collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
And so so the book is, I created a 9-step process called Improvise. And there's stories about musicians, there's stories from musicians. There's each step has some neuroscience about the science behind that area, whether it's improving or positive attitude or visualization. I dive into the neuroscience, and then I give you some practical things to do and some assessment questions, so that the goal is that by the time you walk away, that book is going to transform how you think, how you feel, what you think about, and it's going to give you some things, practical things that you can do in your organization to make some real changes to develop high-performing teams. And there's some things that I learned about even about high performers that they do or have in common that I'd never heard of. And I found it through some research in neuroscience. And then the other part of it is some music. So I'm actually working on my first album. And because of all the networking, I was introduced to a gentleman who, first I was told, well, he plays piano for our church. And then come to find out that, well, he not only plays piano for your church, but he's the Grammy-nominated producer who worked with Grover Washington for 10 years, did Vanessa Williams' gold album, did Rachel Farrell's gold album, has produced, just did music for Netflix, and he's actually producing my album and he's playing on it. And,
great! Yes.
Donald Robinson, and so we're working together, and I'll be rolling out some songs that I've written, and some cover tunes and some standard jazz tunes that we're going to kind of create in an innovative way that'll kind of become part of a package. And I'm rolling out a podcast that's called Workplace Jazz, based on the book. Well, I'll be talking about these concepts, but I'll also be interviewing other business experts as well as some top line musicians that are out there. And I've already gotten endorsements from like Brian Tracy Jim Cathcart, and a number of other folks.
That's awesome. And you can catch this interview on brightsideglobaltrade.org. And Elton, if you'd like to close us out, I'm going to end this interview right now.
Okay. I don't know. Well, I'll discontinue the recording interview, but we have been delighted to hear from Mr. Gerald Leonard, and he is a noted author and a noted presenter and musician. Among his many accolades, and quite a few more that he has been involved in, a public speaker. Is this your only book, or you've got other books too, Gerald?
Well, I have that. That's my first
We
book,
just
and I have a
finished that.
second book
All
coming.
right, well, we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank